Day one, executive order. Restore the legal status of 1.8 million young people in the DACA program. Day one, we change border policy so that federal agents will never snatch babies from the arms of their mothers.
Bernie Sanders on DACA tonight, one of the issues that did break through in the conversation, and a good time for us to bring in another contributor of ours tonight, and that is Dr. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, who gets to be a professor at a great place, the LBJ School of Public Affairs out at the University of Texas, Austin. We are duty-bound to say at this point, hook 'em horns. Doctor, I'm happy to have you as part of our coverage. How did you view tonight through the prism of your life's work and what you teach to young students at UT?
Right. Thank you, Brian. First of all, thank you for the hook 'em horns.
Well, you know, I love Austin.
Texas A&M, sorry about it. In terms of the immigration discussion, I thought it ended up being a very good discussion. However, I was taken aback by the beginning of that discussion, where the question started off directed toward Andrew Yang, the only person there with a more direct connection to immigration. He is the son of immigrants, and he tried to dodge the question. He didn't even want to answer the question of immigration. And this concerns me, Brian, not because he is a second-generation immigrant, but because as the president of the United States, immigration is a major issue that you have to have a response for, that you have to have a vision for. So that took me aback. But then I was heartened by seeing what the rest of the candidates did. So we saw Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg bring in the human face of what immigration is. So not just about DACA, but looking at the crisis at the border, where we're seeing children separated, pulled from the arms of their mothers. So speaking about that, we saw Tom Steyer bring in the racial element. So it's not just about immigration, but it's about the immigration of brown individuals into this country that Trump and his base are going after. And finally, I thought that what Biden did was genius in that he really harnessed that Ellis Island vision of immigration. He said, hey, we are a country of immigrants. We were built through immigration. So here he is speaking to the fourth, fifth, sixth generation immigrant whose grandparents, great-great-grandparents came in through Ellis Island or came in before that. He was speaking to them. So he wasn't trying to connect on immigration in terms of empathy, like these poor children who are getting separated at the border, but more about immigration is about you, John Smith, Johnson, all of these American names that we have come to identify with being more American. At one time, they were immigrants. So I thought that was a very robust discussion that connected it to the larger American polity.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.